Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 26 February 2018. Now let us begin. Now from page 1, the first news we would be analyzing is about the Rustom 2 unmanned aerial vehicle. Now let us understand about this further. Now the reason it is in the news is because DRDO, or the Defense Research and Development Organization, successfully flew its UAV Rustom 2 at its aeronautical test range. Now considering Rustom 2 is a part of the Rustom series, which includes other UAVs such as Rustom 1, Rustom H and Rustom C. Now it is a medium altitude, long endurance drone, wherein by the term medium altitude, it can fly up to an altitude of 22,000 feet. And has an endurance of over 20 hours, meaning that it can stay in flight for roughly about 20 hours. It is also capable of carrying payloads for electronic and signal intelligence, and is therefore can be used for military operations. Now hopefully up till here you have understood the specifications of Rustom 2, that it is part of the Rustom series and is a medium altitude of roughly about 22,000 feet with a long endurance of roughly about 20 hours drone. Moreover, it is capable of carrying payloads for electronic and signal intelligence that can be used for military operations. Now the other information that you need to know for your UPSC examination is that the Aeronautical Development Establishment is the major aeronautical system research laboratory of the DRDO and is the nodal agency in the development of unmanned aerial vehicles. Now the other UAVs that are being developed by DRDO includes. Now the first one is Kapothaka, a mini remotely piloted vehicle demonstrator. The second is Ulka, which is an air-launched target. The third drone is Nishant, which is a tactical UAV developed for surveillance. The fourth one is Lakshya, which is a pilotless target aircraft. And the fifth and the last one is the Controlled Aerial Delivery System, which is an airborne guidance and control system. Now hopefully up till here, you have also understood the purposes of the various UAVs developed by DRDO. Now a question has been asked in your UPSC mains examination in the 2010 mains examination, and it asked about Predator drones and the reason as to why it has been in the news. And similar questions can be asked about Rustom 2. And similarly, the purposes of UAVs, including Rustom 2, can also be asked in your prelims examination. And with this, we move on to our next article. Now we have taken the lead editorial from page 8. Now what this article talks about is the recent banking sector fraud such as the PNB scam that have adversely affected the banking sector. So what we'll do with regards to this article is first understand on how bank rules were flouted and how banking regulations should be improved. And finally, whether privatization of banks is an answer to the banking sector problems. Now let us further understand this. Now the focus of the lead editorial is on the banking sector regulations. The article talks about the recent banking frauds, such as the Punjab National Bank fraud, that have adversely affected the banking sector. And according to the author, the banks have already reeling under the pressure of rising NPAs or non-performing assets. And because of these problems, it may further lead to a slowdown in the dispersal of bank credit, such as in the form of loans, etc., and because of which it would affect the total investment level in the country. Now to understand on how banking regulations should be improved, we need to first understand as to how the banking frauds first took place. Now in the recent banking fraud, the bank rules were flouted due to the misuse of LOUs or letters of undertaking. Now a letter of undertaking is a bank guarantee that enables a bank's customer to raise short-term capital from another Indian bank's foreign branch. So for example, Punjab National Bank would issue a letter of undertaking for its own customers, which would be given to a foreign branch of an Indian bank such as Axis Bank to help in raising short-term capital, and this capital would then be guaranteed by the Punjab National Bank. Now this LOU was created by the RBI to help importers obtain credit. However, these letters of undertaking were misused as they were not recorded as contingent liabilities in the bank's books, and therefore these LOUs were misused and excessive LOUs were issued, and these funds were then transferred to shell companies. Now, shell companies are those companies that include multiple layers of firms which are created for the purpose of money laundering. Since most of these shell companies do not deal in any product or render any services, and these companies hold assets only on paper and not in reality. Now, hopefully, up till here, you have understood on how bank rules were flouted through the misuse of letters of undertaking, wherein such LOUs were not recorded as contingent liabilities, wherein contingent liabilities are potential liabilities that may exist or form in the future, and therefore needed to be recorded in the bank's book. And since they were not recorded, excessive LOUs were given, and the capital that was raised from such LOUs were then transferred to shell companies for money laundering. Now let us understand on how, according to the author, banking regulations should be improved. Now, according to the author, these frauds have resulted due to inadequate banking regulations by the Government of India and the RBI. And according to the author, the government should ensure strict adherence to banking rules and more transparency and accountability from banks. Moreover, according to the author, large exposures to a single borrower should be avoided, wherein, according to the author, based on RBI data, around 12,000 borrowers accounted for roughly 38% of bank loans, wherein large corporates account for 85% of the bad loans, and just the top 12 non performing assets account for 2,50,000 crore. Moreover, the author has asserted that the RBI should ensure effective stressed asset management and that the banking system recognizes financial distress early and take prompt steps to resolve it. Now, one of the steps that have been floated for banking sector regulation is of privatization. But according to the author, privatization is not an answer for banking sector regulations because, according to the author, the problem lies in regulation and not ownership. And the global financial crisis of 2008, which started from the United States, occurred due to the misuse of rules by private sector banks. And hence, according to the author, banking regulations should be improved through strict adherence to bank accountability and transparency. And further, large exposures to single borrowers should be avoided. And finally, the RBI should take early steps to recognize and resolve financial distress. Now, banking sector regulations forms an important part of a UPSC mains examination and has been frequently addressed in the previous three economic surveys from 2015-16 to the 2017-18 economic surveys. While what is an LOU becomes important from your prelims perspective. And now we move on to our next article. Now we have taken this article from the editorial page on page 8. Now what this article talks about is the mutual interest between India and Canada and further highlights several aspects of cooperation. Now let us understand what are the fields of cooperation between India and Canada. Now according to the author, cooperation between India and Canada is based upon 5 E's, wherein the first aspect is of economy, the second is energy, the third field of cooperation is education, the fourth is entertainment industry linkages, and the final and the fifth one is the empowerment of women. Now, in terms of economic cooperation, India and Canada have decided to finalize the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement and the Bilateral Foreign Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement. Now, moreover, India and Canada intend to link Indian and Canadian flagship programs, wherein Indian flagship programs such as Make in India, Startup India, Digital India, and the Smart Cities project would be linked with Canadian programs such as Innovation Skills Plan, Canadian Technology Accelerators, Startup Visa Program, and Global Skills Strategy programs of Canada. Now, this policy of linking Indian flagship programs with the programs of other countries has been a recurring policy of India and has been done with other countries also. Now, India and Canada have also started the process of Track 1.5 dialogue. Now, in simple terms, Track 1.5 dialogue means that government and non government actors would work together. Now, the Track 1.5 dialogue between India and Canada has been formed on innovation, growth, and prosperity. And therefore, government officials from India and Canada and non government actors such as private citizens, companies, think tanks, among others, would work together to ensure the enhancement of innovation, growth, and prosperity in India Canada relations. Now, apart from this, India and Canada would also work for agricultural cooperation, wherein both India and Canada would sign an agreement in the upcoming month on export of Canadian pulses, wherein the agreement would be on technology protocols with regards to quarantine. Now, by technology protocol on quarantine, it means that India and Canada would be inspecting incoming cargo at their ports of entry in order to protect local agricultural products from foreign diseases and pests. So, if Canada exports pulses to India, it would be inspected at Indian ports of entry for pest or agricultural diseases in the hope that it should not affect Indian agricultural products. Now, apart from this, Canada would facilitate the entry of Indian organic products into Canada. Now, hopefully, up till here, you've understood the various factors of economic cooperation between India and Canada, that both of them would facilitate for the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement and the Bilateral Foreign Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement, that both these countries would link their flagship programs together, that they would form a Track 1.5 dialogue based upon innovation, growth, and prosperity. And apart from this, both nations would cooperate in the field of agriculture and sign an upcoming agreement on the export of Canadian pulses, and moreover, Canada would facilitate the entry of Indian organic products into Canada. Now, apart from this, in the field of energy cooperation, Canada has said that it would continue the export of uranium to India for civilian purposes. Apart from this, India and Canada have decided to form an energy dialogue and expand the Canada India Ministerial Energy Dialogue to three further fields, which are electricity, energy efficiency, and renewable energy. So, hopefully, up till here, you have also understood the level of energy cooperation between India and Canada, that Canada would continue its uranium exports to India for civilian purposes, and that the Canada India Ministerial Energy Dialogue would be expanded to include electricity, energy efficiency, and renewables. Now, in terms of cooperation in the field of education, around 1 lakh Indian students study in Canada. And to improve cooperation in the field of education, an MOU in higher education was signed between India and Canada. And apart from this, under the Canadian flagship program of Global Skills Strategy, and this program would facilitate the movement of highly skilled persons from India to Canada. Now, hopefully, up till here, you've also understood the level of cooperation in the field of education between India and Canada, that around 1 lakh Indian students are currently studying in Canada, and an MOU or a Memorandum of Understanding was signed in the field of higher education, and that under the Global Skills Strategy Program of Canada, both countries would facilitate the movement of highly skilled persons from India to Canada. Now, apart from this, in the field of science and tech cooperation, Canada would continue to take the advantage to use the facilities of Indian Space Research Organization or ISRO to further launch satellites. Apart from this, India might participate in the Canadian Arctic Research Program. Now, this research would be based on the northern Arctic region. Now, apart from this, both countries would work against Khalistan terrorism and extremism, wherein both countries have signed a framework for cooperation on countering terrorism and violent extremism. And according to the author, India would ensure that Canada, under this framework, works against the Khalistani movement. Apart from this, India and Canada, in their joint statement, wherein Canada has reaffirmed that it would respect the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity, and thereby not support the Khalistani movement, which demands a separate Khalistani state, and it's therefore against the territorial integrity of India. Now, hopefully, up till here, you have understood that India and Canada would cooperate in the field of science and technology, wherein Canada would continue to use ISRO to launch satellites, and India might participate in the Canadian Arctic Research Program. Apart from this, India and Canada would work against the Khalistani movement under the framework for cooperation on countering terrorism and violent extremism. And moreover, Canada has reaffirmed that it would ensure the territorial integrity of India is not threatened by the Khalistani movement which exists in Canada. And apart from this, both countries have ensured to form an NSA level dialogue between the National Security Advisor of both nations to work against terrorism and extremism. And finally, Canada would support for membership towards the Nuclear Suppliers Group, wherein Canada has already earlier supported India's entry to MTCR, Wisner Arrangement, and the Australia Group, and has again reiterated its support for India's membership to the Nuclear Suppliers Group. Now, according to the author, many fields of cooperation exist between India and Canada, such as in the field of economics, energy, education, among others. and has also said that Canada should not overlook India's concern with regards to the Khalistan issue. Now, the recent visit of Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, would be covered in the upcoming March edition of the Focus magazine and would include an in-depth analysis of the recent India-Canada joint statement and the Khalistani issue. Now we move on to our next article. Now we have taken this article from page 14. Now what this article talks about is the future course of non-performing assets. Now let us understand further about this article. Now banks recognize loans as non-performing assets if its interest or principal payment is overdue by more than 90 days. And according to the author, the future course of such non-performing assets is currently uncertain in nature. Now, according to the author, the gross NPAs in 2012 was roughly around 1.4 lakh crores and was about 3% of the total loans, while by 2017 it has increased to around 7.9 lakh crores or about 10.2% of the total loans. Now, out of this 7.9 lakh crore, about 6.8 lakh crore is of public sector banks. And therefore, there has been a rising proportion of non-performing assets. And so, according to the author, the future course is uncertain. Because there has been a rising proportion of NPAs. And second, there has been a decline in profit of banks, wherein the profits of banks was around 91,000 crore in the year 2013, but has declined to around 44,000 crore in 2017. And most of this profit has been made by private sector banks, and the public sector banks have been in loss since 2016. Now, apart from the negative factors, as per the author, there is some positive outlook reflected by the Financial Stability Report of the Reserve Bank of India, wherein the growth of stressed advances ratio, which is the ratio of stressed assets to total advances, wherein stressed assets includes NPAs or non-performing assets plus restructured loans plus written off assets, and wherein, according to this report, the growth of stressed advance ratio has actually declined. And similarly, the gross NPA ratio, which is the ratio between gross NPA to total advances, and according to the RBI Financial Stability Report, the growth in NPA ratio has also declined. So, according to the author, why the future course of non-performing assets is uncertain? Because even though the growth of stressed advance ratio and the NPA ratio has declined in the current financial stability report of the RBI, there has been a rising proportion of NPAs and a decline in the profit of banks. And because of these unbalanced factors, the future course of non-performing assets is uncertain. Now, apart from this, the author has also highlighted about future uncertainty. Because, first, according to the author, the recapitalization package that has been directed by the Government of India to improve the bank's balance sheet has yet to show real-time effect. Apart from this, the author has said that the recognition of stressed assets by banks has not progressed as banks have been reluctant to identify stressed accounts. Now this is because this puts higher provisioning requirements on the banks and therefore reduces their net profits. Now, what is meant by provisioning requirement? Of these loans provided by banks, some are not repaid and become NPAs or bad loans. So, when a loan is not repaid, banks have to meet this loss out of other sources. And therefore, provisioning means that banks have to set aside an amount in order to meet these future anticipated losses. So, out of its capital or profits, banks set aside a certain percentage of amount as provisioning requirement. And these provisioning requirements has been done as per the RBI. And as you know, there has been a decline in the profit of banks, and the public sector banks have been in a loss since the financial year of 2016, and because of which they are not recognizing stressed assets because it would lead to higher provisioning requirement and reduce their profit. Now, hopefully, up till here, you have understood as to why the author considers the future course of non-performing assets as also being uncertain, since the recapitalization package of Government of India is yet to show results, and second, that the banks are reluctant to identify stressed assets, and therefore there is a strong chance that in the future these stressed assets might also come forward. Now, non-performing assets and the explanation given in this section is important from your mains perspective, since NPAs form an important aspect that continues to be in the news and is therefore important from your mains perspective. Now we have taken this article from page 9. Now what this article talks about is about the interaction between artificial intelligence and humans. And according to this article, this interaction can be measured by what is called the Turing test. And according to the author, artificial intelligence is yet to pass this test. Now the question is as to what is the Turing test. Now it was developed by Alan Turing in 1950 and was based upon the philosophical question, which is, can machines think? And for this Turing test, it was replaced as to what is the imitation game. Now the Turing test based upon this imitation game is a three-player game which includes a human interrogator, a human responder, and a computer responder. Now the interrogator or the human questionnaire has to guess as to whether B or C are machines or not. And it is done when the interrogator asks written question to both B and C in the hope of recognizing which is the machine. And according to the Alan Turing test, it is when the computer can pass off as being human to another human that it can be said that computers have matched the capacity of human brains and have become self-aware. Now hopefully up till here you have understood as to what is the Turing test that was developed by Alan Turing in 1950 and is mainly based upon the imitation game wherein the computer has to imitate as being a human wherein another person is unable to guess as to whether he's talking to a machine or a human. Now obviously there are many critiques of the Turing test, but we will not be analyzing that today. Now apart from this, what you need to know about your UPSC preparation is about the robot Sophia. Now Sophia is a robot which works upon artificial intelligence. And in the year 2017, it was granted citizenship of Saudi Arabia. And moreover, she was named the world's first United Nations Innovation Champion by the United Nations Development Programme. And Sophia will have an official role in working with UNDP to promote sustainable development and safeguard human rights and equality. So hopefully, from your UPSC prelims perspective, you know that Sophia is a robot with artificial intelligence capability, and in 2017, it was granted citizenship of Saudi Arabia. And moreover, it became the first UN Innovation Champion by the United Nations Development Programme. So a question can be asked in your UPSC prelims examination such as, which of the following has granted citizenship to Sophia? You would know that the correct answer is Saudi Arabia. Now with this, we come to an end in the analysis of today's paper. Now we move on to the question for today.